Hello, this is a quick video for how to replace an alternator in the 2007 Ford Escape with a 3-liter engine. As you can see, this is what's in the car. It has 3 pieces of plastic. You have this front piece, you have this back piece, and then you have this other piece on the top. Because of that, you can see how there's a new one. As you can see, it makes it much bigger, and there's no way you can take it out of the car with all these pieces connected. So you have to take these pieces off while it's in the car in order to get it out. You can either take this thing out through the top or through the bottom. In my case, I found it was easier to take it out the top. If you have the tools and if you have the lift, it's easier to take it out the bottom. And make no mistake, this is a motherfucker to take out. Now, taking a closer look at this, this is oriented in the car like this. It's at this angle. Where my hand is, that's the firewall. Where the front of the alternator is, that's the left side of the car. And you can see the bolts. Bolt holes here. So what you have to do, first step is you have to take this piece off, one 8mm here, and on this side there is a push pin here. I wasn't able to get a screwdriver in here, so we'll end up having to either rip it off or do something similar, but you can use a twist tie to put it back on. And the reason you have to take this off is because you can't get this bolt. The bolt head is covered by this, so you need to take that off first. Second piece you have to take off is this horn here. You can see it's another 8mm bolt here is connecting it, and this is going to be pointing up in the car to the basically like this. So you have to take that off in order to get access to this bolt here. Now, as you can see, these 2 bolts that hold the bottom, these are 10mm. And give it access underneath the car through beside the CV joint. This bolt has this torx top on it. Now, some videos indicate that you can use an E8 to take that off. In my case, it was too wobbly. Here's the E8. And I found it was just too wobbly to get that on there. And this bolt is not on there very tight. It's on there, but it wobbles a lot. I found it way too wobbly to get it out, so I ended up going to a bigger size, an E10. A lot easier to take out. It's a little wobbly. It's not on there that tight, so it's perfectly acceptable. Now for me, to make it or break it, discovery I had to get this thing out through the top is this. So orient the alternator like this, where the front of the alternator is toward the firewall. The 2 bolts is at the top, and you take these 2 studs out in the car while it's at the bottom cavity before you try to take it out the top. If you keep these on, they will come up against the electrical harness and it could damage it. And this also takes up more room. Take these out. That's what made the difference for me. Going back to this thing, the original one, look on the back here. You can see it has 3 8mm bolts that connect onto the stud. And they're very difficult to get out. You have to remove this piece, all three of these pieces, while it's in the cavity in the car. Otherwise there's not enough room to take it out. What I found the easiest, I could get a couple of the bolts out. This one and this one. So this one from the bottom, this one from the top. This one I could not get a hold of because of how close it was to the exhaust. So I ended up taking the alternator off, taking all the bolts off, and then you can spin it in the cavity to get this bolt off. Once you get this bolt off, you can pull this piece out. Here I've taken the bolts out, 3 bolts that holds this on. It just comes right out. And this horn has a bolt at the front here, and it goes on like this. And you can see that it has these 2 holders, one on each side. You have to take this and squeeze both of them at the same time while pulling up on the horn piece, and it'll come out. As you can see, with the 3 pieces, it's a lot smaller, and that permits you to take it out of the car. And then when you put the new alternator in, you have to put these pieces, this piece here, you have to put it in the cavity so that you can reassemble it. You can't do it outside and then try to put it into the car, it won't fit. So these pieces have to be assembled while the alternator is in the cavity at the bottom. That's what makes this job a finesse job. You have to take your time. And there's the 2 together. Here's out in the car. If you want to take it out through the bottom, then you have to go take this 32mm bolt off, take these bolts off, take the CV joint out. There's 2 13mm bolts at the back there. And then if you take this out, you're going to have some transmission fluid drip down. You have to catch that, replenish it when you put it back. I found that taking this off doesn't really save a lot of time. And when inside the cavity here, I put a glove over the boot and another glove over, I don't know if you can see that, another glove over the steering gear, because those tubes are exposed and you don't want the alternator as you're moving it around to damage it. I have a block of wood here. What I did is my arms aren't too long, so I had to do everything I could to make it easier for me to get to the alternator from the top. And so I moved this alternator up and put it on top of the block so it was easier for me to get it from the top. And as you can see, there's a catalytic converter right there. So the shield is really to help with the heat. It's very hot in this space, so it's to protect it. Notice that there is a brake line here. There's a brake line right there. And you have to be careful of that. It goes along the back. And as you're taking it out, you'll be brushing up against it, so you have to be careful. This here is some wiring harnesses, which you also have to be careful of. There's wiring harnesses up in the cavity, which you have to move out of the way. And you have to be careful of those. Up top, you have to take all of this stuff and move it out of the way. And the computer is here, and you have to take these things at the back off. There it is there, that tube. You have to disconnect the vacuum and hoses and stuff from the back of the intake manifold. Again, being very careful. This tube here, this hose, is stuck in the way when you bring the alternator up, so you have to push it out of the way. And there's a bolt, there's a bracket here that holds this on. This is the motor mount. I found a way that I didn't have to take this motor mount and change the engine height, although that is an option. If you take it through here, you can drop it by an inch and that'll give you a bit more room. And I took that bracket off so this hose can be more maneuverable. There's a bolt down at the bottom holding on. Let's see if I can get it. Where the glove is there, there's a bolt that's holding the bottom of this hose. I took that out, so again, more maneuverability. And this is how you bring up the alternator. You bring it up through here. I basically describe it as two-stage. You bring it up through here. This harness, this electrical harness, you have to pull it back. Use, whatever means to strap up the electrical connections, pull them back out of the way, because you're going to be really fighting to get that alternator up through here. It's going to be going against these heater hoses. It's going to be going up against this these tubes for the air conditioner. It's going to be going up against the brake line there. Again, slow and easy, and it'll come out. So stage one is you bring it up through here so that it's just above the heater hoses. Then there's not enough room for it to come out here, so you have to go and move the alternator along here and bring it out in this area here. It'll come out. Now I have this board here because my arms are not long enough to get down there, so I basically use this board to sit on top of the engine or to lie on it. Right, so basically I just have all the stuff moved out of the way, and the alternator goes in and out right there. Be careful not to break off or damage any of these plastic extensions off the back of the intake manifold, and that's what prevents you from being able to take it out over here. So if you use the orientation that I mentioned before, the two bolts side of the alternator should point to the top. The front of the alternator should face the firewall. Take off the two studs that are opposing the two bolt area on the alternator, and then pull it up. And then do the opposite when you put it in. Here's a look. There's the PCV valve right there. There's this big harness. You can see this electrical stuff. So basically there's two bolts holding this harness. There's one here and there's one over here. Again, you got to be very careful. I used a bunch of twist ties to hold this thing back out of the way. There's my block of wood. That's where the I used to hold the alternator up a little higher. Just be careful of the electrical connectors. And then there's this other tube which you can't move, so the alternator has to go up through here, and you have to push this hose like that out of the way as you're pulling up on it. Here's a look at the side of the engine where you have the belt. There is a tensioner right here. It takes a 3/8 inch ratchet, and you can just basically pull it to the left here. So that means toward the back of the engine at a perpendicular angle. Okay, not going up, but perpendicular to this idler. And you don't need a breaker bar. It doesn't take a lot of force to move it, just enough. Then take the belt off. This is the cavity where the alternator is. As you can see, there's the bottom part of that wiring harness. Now, the wiring harness, when it's fastened, it'll be up higher. Right now it's lower to make more room for taking the alternator out. As you can see, there's this wiring harness here, which you have to be careful about when you put the alternator back in. Okay, so let's take a look at why this alternator failed. So I took the 3 studs out for the new one and the old one. I'll take this out. And you can see this is where the brush, this is the voltage regulator and the brush assembly. You get the brush on the top and a brush on the bottom. As you can see, it's pretty worn. If you look at the bottom one, it doesn't look like there's any copper left. So that is the mode of failure for this particular guy. The other possibility is the brushes basically get so small, they get so worn that they don't touch the armature anymore, and there's no contact, and you get nothing coming out of the alternator to charge the battery. The symptom is, when this happens, is the battery light will come on in the vehicle's dash, and if you measure the voltage coming from the alternator to the battery, it'll be around 12.5 or lower. That means there's nothing coming out of the alternator. It should be 14.5 or so volts. Here's the new one. You can see there's no wear. There's lots of copper on the top and bottom brush areas. Now if we take this off, I took the 3 screws out. And this takes T20. There, T20. I'll take this out. And you can see on this one, still lots of life in the brushes. So the brushes weren't the mode of failure here. The mode of failure was this lack of connection here. You can see a little bit of copper at the very bottom, but it's basically all black all the way around here, all around this lower point. The top brush is fine, the lower one has a problem. It's possible that if there's any copper left, you could clean this off and get a little bit more life out of it, but it's not worth it. This is pretty worn. You're better off replacing the alternator.